So this is Faith Over Breakfast, Season 3, Episode 7. Andy, you're Mr. Littleton of Mission Church, and I am Mr. Deepen of The Village in Tucson, Arizona. We just talked about membership. We talked about tithing. We talked about
way more than we
eldership.
expected. Yeah. So it's all kinds of stuff about the inner workings of the church and how it affects you.
I think it will be interesting, and I think you might squirm a little and be uncomfortable, and I hope that's true.
We did.
Yeah, we did. So thank you and for listening, and don't forget to give us 5 stars on iTunes, share us on Facebook, share us from Spotify, give us as many stars on as many platforms as you possibly can. It helps us get this podcast out. We're recording, we're live.
Yeah, I won't tell you about it. No, I'm just kidding.
That's right, we can talk about it afterwards. We'll make this a short podcast. It's on membership anyway.
Church membership. Are you saying there's not a lot to say about church membership?
There's not a lot to say.
I think there's a ton to say. Hey, so in true Faith Over Breakfast fashion, though, in real Eric Siepen style Faith Over Breakfast fashion, you have a Brugger's coffee. I have just brewed for myself a nice Keurig. This goes against everything I stand for and believe in. But I will become all things to all people, apparently. Yeah. If by some chance I could save a couple. And I'm about to eat a Western, one of my favorite sandwiches from Brugger's that our buddy Brian just swung by for me. So excuse a little bit of crunch that will happen in this podcast. I'll try not to make it too explicit on the mic. When Eric's going on some diatribe, I'll take a bite or two, but this is a true Faith Over Breakfast.
I think I just got characterized as the guy who diatribes on the Faith Over Breakfast podcast.
You may have been characterized as that, but if anybody listens to this podcast, they know I diatribe. So
yes,
but so do you.
Oh, okay. On here, I thought I got out of that.
Not quite. You are the one who can hold a really engaging conversation with yourself.
I can. Was it engaging? Did you listen?
No, I didn't listen to it.
Oh, well, that's nice.
But I've heard it was really good.
Really? Who'd you hear that from?
Brian.
Oh, Brian Betts.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, and those of you who tune in from time to time, Brian was with us last podcast, old host of ours. So, anyway, church membership.
Church membership.
This is interesting. We just had a members meeting.
Yeah, you had a members meeting. We just had our yearly
and you always call
membership.
It something different,
Well,
right?
we call it belonging.
Yeah, well, and that's not too wild.
Yeah.
Your names for things are tend to be way more crazy than that.
Well, I mean, everybody longs to belong.
No, that's a great name for it. I like that.
Yeah, so as we get into it, maybe I'll explain why we do it the way we do it, and it's partly why how we understand.
Can I just jump in really quick by saying I don't love the term membership.
No,
it's not a biblical word, and it sounds really
like neither is
club.
Trinity, but we use it too.
I know. Right, so I'm not discounting the concept of being a member, which is we could talk about if we want. But
let's do that.
But the term of it just sounds like joining LA Fitness or something.
It does sound like LA Fitness.
Yeah, and that's I think what I struggle with.
Well,
with
because
the term, and I think why some people
Costco.
Yeah.
I get my Costco membership.
So I think people are like, why do I have to be a member of this church? And I think sometimes they're rejecting less the concept and more just the way it comes across in our cultural setting. So if you could pick, well, you've picked belonging.
Belonging.
Yeah.
And I love belonging.
And I used to call it, before our merger, I would say to be a member at Midtown Church. We didn't call it membership. We called it being a disciple at Midtown.
Yeah.
That was how I worked it. I don't know.
Talking about a guy, you stuck within the word structure, but that almost sounds cult-like or new agey. I am a disciple at Midtown.
Well, aren't they?
Yeah.
They are disciples of Jesus I didn't say disciple of Midtown. I said at Midtown.
Right, disciple of Midtown. Yeah, it's parsing some phrases.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, so why did you want to talk about it? You threw out some topics.
I think I did throw out some topics, and I'll throw them out now. And speaking of that, I'll just talk right on the air. You were talking about bringing in your assistant for our conversation about D&D. I'd like to bring my daughter in because she does it a lot, and does campaigns and all that kind of stuff.
So let's bring in John, Simon the intern, and your daughter for a 4-person D&D.
So we'd have to do it over at your studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
We may have to do a little bit more scheduling than saying next week, but let's do that. I think that would be really interesting. So there's that. I want to talk about that. I also had a couple other subjects that just were on my brain, and ones that I would like to talk about, even though you always seem to avoid these topics. I want to readdress, for my own sake, women in ministry. And
this is your favorite topic.
It is my favorite topic. It's not unnecessarily, but it's one that I feel like, for me, culturally, I run into all the time, both in my church and outside of my church.
Sure.
So I'm nonstop trying to articulate both why we allow women to hold office in our church and why we should do that, and then why others think that's not a good idea, and yada yada, and just in the Me Too movement and all of that. It's an important conversation. So at some point I'd like to have myself recorded trying to articulate some of that with somebody maybe pushing back a little bit and at least discussing it with me.
This is the difference between you and me. I'm willing to do that, but you want to do that. See, I'm like, I don't want to record myself processing anything, even though that's what this whole podcast is about. But things that are like, because it's processing. But anyway,
well, with this kind of this,
if you want to throw our careers in the mud, then let's do it.
But like our career, I don't see. Yeah, I think partly that's because I grew up wanting to be a radio host, wanting to like have my own 3-hour radio program. But anyway, so the reason that membership's on my brain is that a lot of churches don't have membership. Churches look at it differently. Why would you become a member of a church and not just attend that church? These are questions I think we should process through, partly because I think we think about them slightly differently than other churches. Or at least come at them differently. And so that would be a good conversation. So
and I think even though this isn't as hot button, this actually does come up way more for me, oddly enough, than any hot button issue. Like every time we do something with the members of our church or have a members meeting or anything, there's always, and one of the most contentious, it wasn't that contentious, but there was a family I used to work with who they just were like dead set from the get-go, we are never going to be a member of this church or any other church.
Right.
And so it actually has come up so many times for me, even though it doesn't seem like a cultural hot button.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe for clickbait's sake, we'll put Pete Buttigieg on the as the title.
Pete Buttigieg, member of the village, sometimes member of Mission Church.
And then we'll just talk about membership actually. But anyway, so yeah, this comes up for me a lot. So I'm just going to give my journey really quick.
Yeah, real fast.
So
you were done. Okay.
My family was, my dad came from a Lutheran church, so they would have been members, but I didn't really know that. I don't remember us ever being members of a church specifically, my family. Then I went to a church, when I first learned about membership, was from a church that rejected the concept completely. They were like, no members. And that's what got me thinking, oh, why do some churches have members and what's the difference? So this church was congregational, and by congregation it meant you are here and say you believe in Jesus right now, would be because they didn't ever examine that because there was no membership. And so they would vote on things with people who walked in that day and believed in Jesus. That went really weird to me. I didn't think that went very well. And so that made me reflect and wonder. And so probably the first church I ever became a member of was Presbyterian, the one where I worked. That was the first time I ever became a member of a church. And then having done that, studied, having to learn some stuff about church structures, I have come to be fully on board with having people members of a church. And by that, I mean that there is an understanding between the pastor and the people of who they are committed. This is their home. These are my people. we have a relationship. We have a
Yeah.
mutual committed relationship
Yeah.
to one another. Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say membership is a church with officers of some form.
Agreed.
Some form of interpretation as to what biblical office is. Agreeing, so it's a church making an agreement with an individual to work out their faith together. One, and in some ways, both being submitted to the other. So you're joining a church saying,
Absolutely.
I am going to work out my discipleship of with Jesus, my following of Jesus in this particular community, and submit to these particular leaders.
But then those leaders are saying,
right,
I'm going to commit myself to you and submit myself to you.
Right.
Yep.
And so we're making commitments to one another, and I think there's some level of accountability on that. And I think that's biblically, we could make lots of arguments for membership, but just as an overarching flow within the New Testament, it seems particularly clear that we're called to commit ourselves to a people and to the local church itself, and to submit ourselves to the leaders there. And submission is very difficult to do if you don't identify yourself as a person submitting. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to lead a group of people and submit to them if they don't identify themselves as people who you're leading. And so I think that's an important aspect of things.
And now, interestingly, this is going to be a total derail for a second. But here's why I've come to be pretty convinced that churches should also be a part of greater bodies, is because the same thing that I think that we would be asking of individuals, I think churches should submit to the same sort of thing, which is what I think I see in the Jerusalem Council and such things in the scriptures, is where a local church elsewhere would be accountable to other local churches. So this is why the Lone Ranger church, in my mind, is not sufficiently committed and mutually submitting to other churches. And
Sure.
And I wish that all churches were able to do that. I understand the pitfalls. Mm-hmm. And so that's why, and as you know, and as many of our listeners know, our church is not in that boat at this time.
And neither is
we're
ours.
Considering it. Yeah.
And so is ours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's, maybe we'll push back on that. So the letter to the Romans, if you read chapter 16 in particular, you note, and we know pretty much that there's probably maybe 100 people that he's writing to in Rome. And he's greeting households, and it's pretty obvious that probably from household to household, there are disagreements and there isn't unity in doctrine. And that's partly why he writes Romans, is to unite those churches. So let me ask you this question. Paul himself is sort of setting himself up as a bishop of sorts. He's an apostle, but he's directing things. So at some point, the line of accountability ends, right? So I join a church, that church joins a denomination. Who's that denomination accountable to? Who's that? At some point, things stop. So, I think that's the question that our community is asking, is where does it need to
stop? Yeah.
Where does it need to stop? And can we be partnered with other communities and in accountability with other communities around different sets of doctrines and beliefs? Or do we have to be accountable to one? Do we need to be in a stream per se? And I know you just derailed it, but we can come back at it. But
I think so. Yeah, I'm not, by saying what I'm saying, just accepting the denominations as they are, per se. So I don't think that the amount of stringent unity that exists within some denominations, if I'm being honest, is capturing the diversity of the church that we see that was unified and organized together in the New Testament.
Yes.
So I think that we've gone in our quest for strong and pure doctrine and the spirit of the Reformation, and I'm not just talking about Reformed churches, but all of them. in that spirit, we have tried to find doctrinal purity and to be very tight within our denominations. I understand how that can help you be on the same page, but I also don't think that I think that might be going beyond what we see in the scriptures. So I guess I'm saying, like you're saying, Paul's talking to potentially households that have different views and stuff like that. I think that a good denomination or association of churches or network or whatever you want to say could have more diversity of doctrine than what we often see.
And still fit in the fence of orthodoxy.
Yes, I agree. And then on top of that, though, I would say, where does it end? I think my vague answer, I haven't thought about it. I've thought about it, but not in those exact terms. But I think my answer would be, I believe it ends not at the local church. And I know that's a direct disagreement with good friends of mine. I think it agrees. I think that it ends in a commitment of multiple churches. And I would like to add, I think, this is a new thought, but that aren't all in the same cultural context, so that you're not myopic, so that you're not seeing things all through the same cultural lens. I think that's what you might see going on with, Jerusalem and Galatia, and they're not the same.
Right.
And so because those churches are accountable to each other and they're not in the same situation. So that's where, say our two churches were we get along, we want this to end a little further than our local church, so we're going to bond our two churches together. But it's
a great idea,
right? And I'm interested in it. But at the same time, I wonder if we need a little more diversity than that. If it's too easy, if that's almost in our own unique way doing what the denominations we would criticize are doing by being maybe it's not doctrine, but it's the way that we can see things culturally. Right.
And you and I could talk about this forever, but I really want to, so if I'm an individual though, and I'm why do I join a church? I too, I think I was pretty resistant until I was, in my early 20s and was being discipled, and kind of explained why it would be important. And I think there's a lot to proclamation in the church. So the reason that we do the Apostles' Creed and we proclaim it is partly we are making a statement publicly within a space of who we collectively and individually follow.
Yeah.
I think being a member is the same idea, right? I'm saying I belong here. This is where I'm submitted. So when my leader says, this person belongs here, I have a duty to shepherd them to.
You have a responsibility.
And when I find out that they're, I become very concerned as our shepherd as to what they're doing, where they're at, how their discipleship is moving out into the different circles of their life. I'm concerned about their children, their life. I'm very engaged in what's going on. If the person doesn't stand up, I can pursue that person, but I'll never quite know where they stand.
Right.
And there isn't a process of saying, hey, I don't belong here anymore, and this is why. You committed, Andy, to doing these things, and you're not following those, and I've continually said I need you to do that, and you haven't, and so I have to move on. There's accountability to you, there's accountability to me, there's accountability to a larger body. I know it can be abused, and I think that's what people are afraid of.
Of course. Everything can be abused, though.
Yes.
There will be no space that you could go where it couldn't be abused if it went wrong. And so the question is, am I among people who I trust and love, and you make the best choice you can? Yeah.
Right. And I think the whole concept in Ephesians of submitting to one another, that's, for me, that's what membership is it's a submission thing. And it's it's in our membership, it clearly states what the leaders will do, and it clearly states what the members will do.
Yeah.
And a leader is both a member and a leader.
Yeah.
So he has a double accountability to this.
Also true for us. Yeah.
And so like you can look at it and say, hey, like you're not doing these things. What's going on?
Right.
And that could be used as a weapon. But if it's in a community of humility and a community of gospel centered, cross kind of centered community where repentance and confession and forgiveness are a big part of the narrative, then that becomes a document of great mercy and friendship. So I don't know. I think it's exciting to me because I think proclamation is what we're about as followers of Jesus. We proclaim Jesus and that we follow Jesus and that we're identified with Jesus and we identify with his people no matter how annoying they are to us or how hard they are to identify with.
Yeah. So I want to hear, and this is going to be hard for me too, but I'm just going to throw it at you really quick. The elevator speech, and let's say that you've got between floor 2 and 3, and a guy that has been coming to your church gets on the elevator and he looks at you and says, "Hey, that belonging service is coming up. I'm late to work, but why should I do that?"
Why should you do that?
Like a guy says this to you,
or
a girl, or a lady.
I would mostly say what I said.
But you don't have that much time. Like, reduce it real quick. You're between floor 2 and 3. You have 20 seconds.
I have 20 seconds. Well, I mean, if we go back to what we said, that the membership is...
Ding. Oh, shoot, okay, he went to work.
Oh, well, I'm so sorry, buddy. Like, look, here's the thing. It's a group of people who love Jesus committing themselves to you and inviting you to do the same.
Yeah.
I think... Like, where do you belong? That's the question. How do you know you belong to a church if you are not a member of it?
How do you know you belong to a church if you're not?
I can guarantee you, I know I belong personally more than anything in this church because every year I sign my name and print my name to the covenant.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
That's how I know I belong here.
Yep. Great. I like that. How do you know you belong? I'm probably going to steal it. Okay. I think what I've said to people in really quick scenarios is something to the effect of, you should join because the church should know who its people are, and the people should know who their elders are.
Yes.
I've said things like that. Like, you should know who you should be going to with your needs and your concerns, and to know that they're actually committed to you, and the church should know who it should be chasing after and following after and helping, and because there's a million people in the world, and we can't take care of them all, and so we need to know who are our people.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah.
Now, in our church, we have two kinds of belonging or membership.
Yeah, I've heard this,
and I think it's important because I think what my reaction to it is that there's a little bit of exclusivity, and so if you're a church that has an open worship of Jesus. So you're saying, I would like to invite you in to see and participate in the worship of Jesus, even if you don't know Jesus. And you start making friends there and you're like fit, but you're not ready to sign the covenant, follow Jesus, get baptized.
Right. Yeah, you still want there to be a commitment to those folks.
You want to say that you belong along with them. And so that's why we do it every year. I also think the reason we do membership every year is I think you need to remember that you made the statement. You can't just. I became a member 20 years ago,
and this is why we don't re-up membership every year. But at every members meeting, we invite the people who are potential new members, and we review everything with everybody every time. And that we've gotten some pushback on that. Like, I've already heard this before, but I think I forget it. I forget some of the details and I forget why the church exists, and I forget I don't forget who the elders are, but people do, and yes. I think we review.
I've talked to some of your elders, and they feel like you forget them.
Yeah.
They don't even, they're like, I'm not sure Andy knows I'm an elder.
Yeah, sure.
It feels like I take walks with him, and sometimes he doesn't even act like I'm here. He just walks.
He just walks, and he walks ahead of me, and he forgets.
He just forgets I'm here.
Yeah, I walked with Phil this morning. I love that guy. But let's see what I'm saying. I like how you re-up every year. That's interesting. I think that's a way you can do it. For us, we review twice a year with everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think partly in a world where it's so like, where do you belong? it's hard. People are wondering where they fit. And more, since we've kind of become less relational, we don't know where to go.
Right.
So when a community is saying, hey, like, you fit here, even if you don't believe in Jesus, we want to have you around.
Right.
And yeah, there are special parts of this community that you can't participate in because you don't believe in the broken body of Christ and his blood poured out, but you get the benefit of it, and we'd love to have you benefit from it. And I think that's so for us, using membership even as an evangelistic tool is a big part of why we do that, is sort of saying, hey, our narrative is actually broader because Jesus was constantly inviting people into the conversation, and he didn't have and then he would say a hard thing to the crowd.
Yeah.
And for us, the belongers are the crowd, right? They're the people around, and then the members are the disciples.
Yeah.
And for the way we structure it is that the
belongers and the disciples.
We tell the belongers, we tell our members that you are a minister.
Yeah.
Right? So when you sign the covenant, you become a servant.
Yeah.
And a minister of reconciliation, which in some ways, in our minds, theologically elevates you to a deacon. So if you become a member, you're elevated to a deacon, and then our deacons, which we call lead ministers, are the leaders of those deacons. So the servants and the lead servants is how we view it.
And I not using that same terminology, but we view it the same way, or at least that's how I've been trying to say it, is because we do have deacons, but I talked to them very specifically about how everyone in the church is called to serve and to love one another.
Right.
So that's it's not like every time there's a hard task, it gets dumped on you.
Right.
But you are the leaders, the discerners of how we ought to do this, and you are the ones who might delegate this out to the church in appropriate ways.
Right.
But so it's a similar.
And
taking the word deacon just as meaning what it does, servant.
It means servant.
Then I'm comfortable with that. Yeah.
Well, and the thing for us is, we've found in this day and age that our deacons are actually more hybrids. And if you look at like hybrid elder deacons, if you look at Stephen, his
knowledge level is,
and he would make most of our elders and of any church look pretty pitiful,
which is too bad for us today.
Yeah,
but
he was a man full of the Spirit of God, and I think not that our elders aren't, but I think.
Now we hear the truth.
No, but
I'm just kidding.
I think we've kind of relegated deacons to you do all of the servant tasks, but actually deacons are men of prayer and women of prayer and women to teach and men who teach. Like they also then organize.
These were strong spiritual leaders, which is why I don't like when it's the deacons just collect the money and sweep the building. It's like that's not what I'm seeing here.
No.
These people, they had spiritual, clout. Yeah.
They did have spiritual clout. And I think that's important. And just to pause there, I think some of the most powerfully spiritual things you can do as somebody who walks closely with God is sweep the floor and
sure.
But
I'm saying there's no reason the pastor wouldn't do that over a deacon.
Right. There's no reason the elder can't do those things.
Those could be done by any. The question is probably who doesn't have a bad back and who brought the broom, who sees the mess. That's the Trader Joe's model that I think is pretty appropriate. Whoever sees the mess cleans it up.
Well, and I think one of the things that we need to and I know we're into church leadership, but I think this is important, is that part of the job of deacons in particular is not let the elders do deacony things like sweep and do all that things, but their job is to say, are we making sure that Andy and the other elders, Nick, and that they're having space to teach, right, and to pray and to lead evangelism, which is to lead our community into the world. We need to create space for them to do that. So what do we need to take off their plate so they can do that? That doesn't mean that sometimes they need to fix the door in the bathroom or they need to, sweep somewhere because they saw the mess and they need to fix it. But our job is to take care of them at some level and make sure they have that space so they're not overwhelmed with the waiting of tables as the early church.
Yes, absolutely. So there's an accountability, like the deacons, and that's why I call them the discerners, because of the service, of the servanthood, is because they're saying, what should we do, who should do it, and why? Yeah. And so they're going, this could overwhelm somebody, and this I think they're looking out for the pastors, but even the members.
Yeah,
I mean, I think
their job is to look after them that way.
Yeah, in our church, there are people who need to be told, no, you don't need to do this. Somebody else does, because you do it every time.
Right? No, totally.
And it's time for somebody else to step up. And that's what my hope is, that our deacons grow into being really good at doing that. At discerning that out and delegating that out.
Well, and maybe we could jump this into my last subject that I put on my text to you, because I think it's linked, because I texted it would be interesting to talk about the discipline of attending church.
Oh, sure.
And I do think it's connected to membership.
It is.
Because if you're not a member and you miss 3 weeks, I'm going to be like, yeah, well,
sure.
They're visiting. They've got other things. But if you are a member,
they're contemplating the faith. Who knows?
Yeah,
right.
I don't know what they're, But if you do miss 3 weeks and you're a member, and I'm like, okay, I need to know why you're not here. Are you sick?
Right.
Is something wrong? Like our deacons need to. People in the community, we need to be checking in on this person. Do they need help? Are they struggling in their faith?
And then I'm just gonna admit right now, before we go any further, like, I think we're not great at. I think we as church leaders feel uncomfortable, like, checking in on people, because it feels like it could be controlling, and we don't want to do that. But I think we need to, but I think we feel uncomfortable with it. And I think our church in general, like, I think a lot of us, like, opt out for a lot of reasons, a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I think this is a struggle in our church.
Yeah, in our church, I'd say that's not a struggle. We are always checking up on people. I'll tell you what's interesting, as just to say, hey, let's confess faults.
Right.
I think what's hard for me is to publicly, like, disciple people when it comes to like giving.
Oh yeah,
that is a very difficult space for me. I know every pastor seems to think that's true, but it really is, because in some ways it's like, wait, like, my entire salary is built on your tithing,
right?
Which is very humbling,
right?
And on the other hand, it's weird to stand up in front of people and be like, let's talk about what it means to give out of the gospel, like, and
right.
out of with a joyful heart, and what that means, and taking care of your leaders. Like, when you're tithing, you're saying, I want Eric to have some nice things. I want, Andy to be able to drive to and from his job. Right. So I want the church to have lights. I want our missionaries in Turkey to be able to get a check every month.
Right.
So
this is an interesting struggle, especially in our church, because when you've got bivocationalism is held up as a great idea, the whole tent making thing, part of it is like, well, I won't be a burden to the church. But interestingly, that sometimes, like, disconnects you from the church when the church doesn't need to take care of you as much or feel that need.
Yes. Well, I know. So for a long time, I was in a group called Area 215. We had a blog. It's back in my emergent days.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But anyway, that group had a pastor in it who was he was now a church consultant, and he said a lot of things, and I'm like, you're crazy. But one of the things he said to me that I thought was really important, that I've pondered a lot, is he said, you can know the health of the church in their willingness to take care of their pastor.
Right.
So if your church is not taking care of you, meaning they're not paying you a salary that relieves stress, and they're not taking care of the church itself, so the ministries aren't feeling stress, then it's not a healthy church.
Yeah. And I think there's something to that.
I've pondered that a lot. Now, I disagreed with him, vehemently when he said it.
Well, the interesting thing, and I think here's what happens. I know both Nick and I came from large churches where we were a little uncomfortable with how well taken care of pastors were. And I'm less irked about that these days than I was then, because I kind of would say, I think honestly, like, I think there's something to, like, which community are you in, and is there some kind of continuity? Like, you should be able to live in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I think, like, that should just be, if you can't afford to live in the neighborhood, and that's going to look different for every church. And you also shouldn't make an exorbitant amount higher than most people in your community either. I think there's some real
So let's talk about the
balance here. But anyway, Nick came from I worked in the affluent area here in Tucson. I wasn't used to that. So I was like, what?
Yeah.
And he worked in a affluent area of California, similar deal. But we both pushed against that. We're like, we don't want to be making a lot of money on the gospel,
right? Which
I think is good. I think our church appreciates it. I think that's good. But also, you should be taken care of.
Well, here's the thing. And I didn't realize the impact of it all, because when you don't make a lot of money, and I'll just tell people right here on the podcast. So from the beginning of the Village, for the first, I'd say 12 years, I made $29,000 a year.
Right.
And there were 4 people in my family.
Yeah.
And so there were months where we had to tell my kids, like, yeah, we can't actually buy you underwear until next month.
Right.
I mean, that's a little conversation. Our children thought we were poor. Now, other people who saw us on the outside saw that we had 2 cars. And because we live in a community house, we had a big house. Didn't think we were poor.
Right.
But we were. Right. And now that I make a little bit more money and I'm older, so you begin to change your wealth status a little bit. We're still recovering from that financially. Yeah. And so. Oh yeah,
absolutely.
So here's the thing that I have these beliefs, but it's hard for me to talk about them in my community. So maybe I'm just outing myself here with my community a little bit. Is that Scripture is very clear that an elder, a pastor, is worth double honor. That double honor has nothing to do with the way you treat them. It's all financial. And so the reality is, Paul is saying that on average, your leader should make twice as much as you do. And this is true.
I'm doing things with my head that can't be seen because I'm going.
I know, because it makes us uncomfortable.
Sure.
But and the only reason Paul did not take a salary is that he did not want it connected to the gospel.
Right.
Like, he wanted to be like, hey, I'm not getting any money out of this to come preach the gospel.
He did receive a lot of support.
He did receive a lot of support. Here's the other thing that people don't understand. If you ever hear someone say that Jesus' followers were poor people, they weren't. They were upper middle class for the majority. And they had money. They were highly.
Well, there were people who were there were business folks, people who had homes, people who had properties to sell.
Yeah,
things like that. Right?
Well, when they go to feed the 5,000, the disciples were not tongue in cheek saying, "Should we go to the store and should we go to town and buy food for 5,000 people?" Like, that was not a tongue in cheek thing. They had a sense that they had the capacity to feed all these people. Now, my suspicion is everybody had some food and they were thinking, we need to go and supplement all of this. But still, there's finances. So finances are a big part of ministry. And
if Judas was the keeper of the money, like, obviously there was some money.
There was some money there.
Sure.
Right. Well, and wealthy women were supporting Jesus' ministry.
Right.
You can pick that up from Luke pretty clearly. So all I'm saying, I'm not saying I'm making a pitch that I should make double. What I'm making a pitch is that if your pastor can't afford to do the things that you're doing, you should think about what you're doing.
Yeah, I think Paul was saying, even in saying they're worthy of double honor, didn't mean they're always going to get double money. No. But he's saying...
But the word honor is finance. It's not translated. It should be translated double pay or double...
Gotcha. And I think there's something that comes with, and I appreciate this, when you see, say, like a company owner who profit shares or something.
Right.
And you go, they are worthy of getting paid all of it.
All of it, right.
Now, they don't require that.
No.
But they're worthy of it. And so then you want to take care of them as well as possible. You say, this is a benevolent leader. This is a good leader. This is a leader who cares, right?
Right. Well, and a leader shouldn't come in, and this is where my anxieties of all this is I don't want to be a leader who comes in and says, well, you need to pay my staff this, you need to pay me this. Why are you guys not doing this? No, you want
your people
to be paid at the level that is going to make ministry in this community happen. I don't want to be a burden on the community. At the same time, I want the people who I'm working with not to be in the position I was for 12 years.
Right.
Wondering, like, when my daughter's wondering, can I afford this?
Sure.
What,
we're in the same boat. Like, we're in a recovery, and we've had several difficult things come our way, and as a family, we keep going, man, the church planning process we knew was going to be rough because I started out making nothing.
Right.
And I had a little handyman job on the side, and then that turned into a company. And interestingly, I made money there for a little bit, and now I don't anymore because to grow the company and try to move it toward a healthy place, I had to forego what I make. So, we've had this thing where it's like, are we, and I get $25,000 a year from the church, which I at this point feels a lot better, but it's small. It's not a lot. Small. And so, we've definitely felt like, now when I made more than this as a youth director, when I was in my early 20s. And I could have kept that job, right? And grown in it. And, and we could have gone, when I did an internship, I did a 10-hour internship. So imagine how much you make doing that, pastoral internship. And I probably put in about 20 hours a week there and did some handyman work on the side. And then after that, we started a church where the salary was $0. So you can imagine that there's many years of drought.
Yes.
So how that impacts somebody's, you can imagine. So and we haven't recovered from that. So that's a huge thing. But I also feel discomfort as well. I feel that tension,
right?
Where it's like I want to. In a way, and Nick and I have talked about this, we'd love to just be able to say we offer the gospel free of charge, and we're both really super committed to this. But at the same time, there's a stress level and a burden that comes with being on the verge of running out of money constantly that impacts your ability to be a good minister.
Yes.
And that's complicated.
Right. Yeah. And it requires you to trust God. But I think some of it comes from my own baggage. I didn't want to tithe when I was in my 20s. My wife was the one who really made us do it. Yeah. Right. For me, my family was poor, but it was a built-in rhythm that I think I've always felt it was good, and I felt honored. There have been very few times we haven't tithed in my life, very few, or given some, or more. And those times I felt it saddened me. Mm-hmm. It hasn't been phew, we got to keep them. It was it felt, it was sad. Yeah. But anyway, that was me. Sorry, but for you, that burden, your wife brought that to the table. Yeah, she definitely brought it to the table. Because my parents, I know they tithe, but they always tithe in secret, and I don't know if they ever really tithe to the church.
Tithe it to something.
It was always another ministry, which was, and here's the thing,
and I've known people who did that too, and I currently probably disagree with that practice.
Well, and that's what I love about membership is part of what you're saying, at least in our membership covenant, is that your primary joyful tithe will be given to the church. Yeah. And here's the cool thing in our church about membership is because you say you're a member and you're committing your tithe to this church, if you think wow, I'd love our church to support this, as a member, you can go to an elder and say, I'm a member, right? And I would love our church to consider this. And then you all of a sudden have the power to bring that to the elders to be prayed over and thought about, which I think is cool and I tell people it's kind of like being a son or not being a son. If my son comes to me and says, hey, I think our family should do this, I'm going to listen to him. But if my friend who lives next door comes over and says, I think you guys should do this, I might be yeah, maybe that might come up.
But the level of weight that suggestion carries, absolutely.
Yes, it's huge.
And it's the same for the people who are the committed members of our church. And I would say, and this is where we need to do the work, is we have, I do, because we'll tell people as a member there are benefits and you have a voice and stuff. But I'll tell it the truth is, the more committed you are, the stronger the voice is. And we need to do a better job of making sure everybody, is as locked in as can be. But if the member who's they're like, I'm a member, but I've been gone for 10 weeks, pops in and says like, why aren't we doing this? I'm going to kind of go, I don't know. Why don't you go to church? Like, honestly, but like,
right. And
I mean,
hopefully
like,
you'll have run them down.
Right. But I'm just saying, like,
right.
but it's like, like, you're going to come in and critique this right now? You're not even here.
Yeah.
But then, like, somebody who's like, they are with us, they are pulling together, they are supporting this, they are putting out the signs, they are there, they are engaging with people, they are, like, whatever it is, and they come and they say, why aren't we doing this? I go, okay, hold on. I want to hear what you have to say. Right. Like, it carries.
Yeah, it does carry weight.
It carries weight.
And that's, I mean, heck, that's true in my family. If, my son, he volunteers to do the dishes a lot. He's very, he'll do anything you ask.
Right.
I'll listen to what he has to say.
Right. And I'm not saying I don't like the people who aren't on, or I don't understand it, but I'm saying your what you have the power you have to like shape this is kind of relative to the amount of impact you have upon the whole thing and how involved you are.
Right.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think membership is a hard thing because you start talking about membership benefits and all these kinds of things,
which all the terms, and there are benefits to being a member, but it sounds gross, right?
It does sound
gross. It sounds like a gym.
But I think the odd thing is I think we've run away from like really asking people to step up in discipleship. Jesus says it in Luke, and he also says it in Mark, that we're supposed to take up our cross daily. Or maybe he just says it in Luke, but daily cross taking. I mean, if you just meditate on that one little thing.
Oh man.
Cross is death and sacrifice.
Right.
So what we're saying when we join a church, and what I say when I join the Village, is I want to be reminded, taught, and shaped into a follower of Jesus who's willing to daily take up his cross. That requires some uncomfortability. And so when you decide to be a member, you are saying, I'm going to live an uncomfortable life at times. I'm going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be
sacrificial.
Yeah.
And mutually and
and
I get it too, because there's churches who and I could see this. They go, why is this pastor making so much money? What's like, I don't see him really involved. Right. In people, and that happens. And
it does happen.
There's pastors who they prepare a sermon for 30 hours a week, and they're in their office, and then they're doing professional pastor stuff, and nobody sees them.
Right.
And somehow they make gajillion dollars because they went to seminary, and I can see why.
They're charismatic or whatever.
Yeah, I could see why members of the church would be like, eh. But interestingly, those guys do tend to get paid more, and the ones who are just like in people's lives tend to get paid less, and that's a little bit backwards.
I would agree at some level. Yes.
But the other. I just thought I needed to say, for our church's sake, we say at church, like, we don't teach the tithe. And so if people from my church are listening, they're going, well, Andy, you're talking about it. And I would say I actually do tithe. And the reason, like, we say we don't teach the tithe is because in the New Testament, I would say this, it's not restricted to the tithe. It's nowhere is it just hammering on the 10%.
Oh, yeah.
I think what you see in the New Testament is, you see that the widow who gave all that she had, there's that. And then you see people selling exorbitant amounts of things to make sure that other believers in the community are supported. And I don't think they restricted themselves to the law, to the 10%.
Right.
So I don't think the big question is, are you nailing your 10% on the head, pre-tax, post-tax, whatever, as I've been coached in the past. But the big question is, are you giving with a joyful, generous heart for the sake of bearing one another's burdens? And I wouldn't be too worried about your exact percentage here.
Right. And I think New Testament and Old Testament is just about orientation.
Yeah, because you could give your tithe in the Old Testament.
It's about 23% in the Old Testament. but the idea, once you go through
Explain that.
Okay, so
I've never heard that before.
There's a 10% tithe, but then there's all the different offerings that you have to make for all the different kinds of festivals and sacrifices.
And that's above and beyond,
right? It's above and beyond. So it goes out to about 23%. The thing is that the law is set up for us to see how we're not making the law.
Yes.
Like, it's not there to give us
a pathway to righteousness.
Righteousness, yes. So in the New Testament, it's all about the gospel. Christ gave all for me. And so in every aspect of my life, it's as to the Lord, as to Christ, in Christ. All these phrases are saying the gospel.
Right.
Jesus poured his life out for me, and therefore I give beyond my means.
Right.
I pour out my money, my time, my energy, my love for my wife, my kids, everybody, as a sacrifice in response to the beauty of the gospel and the deliverance from
which
the
means
darkness.
In like a very practical way, I would say, like for our family, when we were trying to buy the building, and I'm sure this was the case for a lot of other people in the church. I actually don't monitor anybody's giving, so don't worry, people. I don't know, but the like when we decided to sell some things that we had, like a bike I really liked and a pop-up trailer that we owned, to help buy the building. But we didn't go like, well, there was our tithe, it's like it was like, this is above and beyond. And I think the same, I think that's what you see in the scriptures over and over, is there's like a regular maintenance care for the leadership, the gathering. I assume they were buying their food together when they met together to have dinner and stuff like that. And then when a need came up, it was like, let's meet that need. Right. So it wasn't like, and I think what happens a lot of times, kind of, I'm not saying your parents did this, but there might be a need that pops up that some organization is like, hey, we need money. And somebody goes, oh, I'm going to tithe over there this month. Right. And I think that's a completely unbiblical way of going about it. Right. Like, I'm going to move my giving over there. I think if you feel moved to do that, you should, and it should be over and above.
Well, and I think that you're kind of placing the restriction on yourself with your giving versus your tithing. You're bleeding.
Andy has a bloody nose.
Oh my gosh!
How exciting!
All right,
well, let's wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up. Let me finish. My very quick point here is just that when you decide to be a member of a church, you are restricting your giving, and that you're saying, I'm going to give here. Whereas if you're not a member, you have a little bit more freedom.
Yep. So it's good to know.
That's good to know.